good internal communications program is like an insurance policy.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vela-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vela-Williamson.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vela-Williamson. Today, I'm joined by Amanda Todd. Amanda is an executive communications officer to Liz Centoni, Cisco's chief strategy officer and general manager of applications at Cisco. Prior to joining Liz's executive communications team, Amanda built and led internal communications program at Duo Security, now part of Cisco, and at Car2Go North America. She is a firm believer that the best communications understand people, products, and culture, and has a special passion for employee well-being, corporate social responsibility, and creating programs that foster a strong sense of purpose and belonging. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm so happy to be on with you today.
Well, I'm thrilled you can make it, and congratulations on your new role at Cisco. That's exciting.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, a little bit has changed for you, so tell us more about your background and then what you're doing today.
Yeah, a little bit has changed. My name is Amanda Todd. I am a native Texan. I've been living in Austin proper for about 5 years, but I'm looking soon to relocate to San Francisco, which is quite a change for me. So as you said, I just took a new role as the executive communications manager for Liz Centoni, who's the chief strategy officer and GM of applications at Cisco. She is amazing in every way, and I'm just deeply honored to be a part of her communications team. I was also really lucky to work for the past year during the height of the pandemic at Duo Security, which is an acquired arm of Cisco. They specialize in cybersecurity MFA solutions that secure access for the workforce. It's an amazing company with an amazing set of leaders, and I was responsible for running the internal communications program for Duo Security for the past year or so. So it's been a pretty interesting ride. It's when I've been reflecting on it in the past couple of weeks, it's pretty intense to say that I started not just one job in a pandemic, which I started at Duo in March of 2020. So right at the top of lockdown.
Wow.
When our life was grinding to a halt. Yeah, but I am crazy enough to start 2 jobs in the pandemic. So
ambitious enough.
Very ambitious, yes.
So Amanda, internal communications isn't really understood like it should be. You and I had talked about that before our interview today. How would you describe what internal communications is?
Yeah, you are 100% right that internal communications is not well understood. It's so incredibly broad, and a lot of times it's not something that anyone builds in a core function. Usually it's built somewhere in the marketing team or an HR team, or sometimes in a core comms team. But internal comms operates in a field where it's wrought with confusion because the subject matter is so broad. In my mind, internal comms was always first and foremost about the people, and that's why I ended up in that field. I started in an external communications team, but I was realizing that our teams around us were not very connected to a core mission. And this was at Car2Go, when I was at Car2Go North America. We were a global company, but we had no overlap or interconnect with each other from North America to Germany. And that was fully because of the absence of an internal communications program. So for me, internal comms is the medium that you share information with your employees. It's about building understanding. It's about creating excitement and commitment. And ultimately, if you're doing it really well, you're driving your group towards achieving your top leaders' desired results, right? You're marching towards those targets. If everyone's on the same page and super committed, then the likelihood of you getting to where you want to go is a lot more likely.
Absolutely. And you're right on. It does definitely seem to be more reaction by a lot of organizations, particularly the smaller ones, small businesses, nonprofits, or those of that nature and structure where they're not thinking about their employee communications. And often when I work with them, because I have more of an external role, they're usually surprised when I put their employees as their primary audience when we start a campaign. And that's because if employees aren't aware of what an organization is doing, and they're not educated on new initiatives, services, or programs, as you know, any type of new protocol you're rolling out, then the customer can absolutely feel that on the external side. And employees should be our number one brand champions. So thank you for sharing why that's so important today.
Sure. And I mean, that's how I recommend it for leaders as well. A good internal communications program is like an insurance policy. And you don't want to get to a place as a top leader where you're having a crisis of some sort, or something is happening, or a pandemic is going on, and you don't have anyone to talk to your employees, right? Like, the worst thing you can do is have news about your company coming out without any clarity going on inside of your organization. So a good internal communicator will take a look at the holistic playing field, and they'll help you avoid those types of crisis situations, and they'll have a plan in place, and they're always going to have your back. That's so important. And I've seen it done so many times where top leaders, they get in these situations where we're like, I'm confused, and our employees, they're not performing well, and everyone's gossiping. And it's solely because there's not someone sitting there dedicated to listening to what your people really want to hear, what kind of information is working for them, what's not. That internal comms function should sit right next to all of the top leaders and really be evaluating what you need to achieve your goals, right? Like, that's a hugely important thing.
Yes. If you don't tell people what's going on, I always say they will fill in the gaps themselves.
Yeah.
So you talked about the pandemic, and that's still on everyone's mind. What internal communication practices worked well for you in the work you do during the pandemic?
So internal comms was critically important. And I think that it's been really interesting to watch LinkedIn or job posts explode with the need for internal comms people in the past year. I've noticed that trend happening. I think other practitioners will probably notice that trend happening. Like, the strategic need for a function like this became extremely clear when every single one of us were forced to work remotely, right? You're distributed more than ever. You have to find a way to stay connected. And the best way to do that is through internal comms. And not just that, but you were 100% right when you say people will make up their own minds in the absence of information. They'll derive their own conclusions. So internal comms really had to step in fast when there was so much confusion and movement happening at the top of 2020 last year, right? Everything changed. And so those internal comms people became not just a tertiary function anymore. They became singularly important to make sure that our leaders are connecting with our workforce. They are letting them know, hey, this is what we're going to be doing, staying super connected. So I think that as comms people, there was probably a huge overcorrection of information. And even if we didn't have all the answers, it was better to just put something out in the world from our leaders and from each other versus nothing at all, right? Like, it was the only thing keeping us kind of holding on to each other and holding on to what was going on and trying to make sense of all the chaos that was unfolding around us. And it was two ways, right? There was some logistical things that obviously needed to be told, but the real heart of internal comms, at least from the way that I approach the job, is bringing heart into that message, right? Like, the most important thing was your safety. And it was a really tough time. I mean, all through 2020 last year, not just the pandemic, but, you know, social justice was at the top of everyone's minds, and really leaning in heavy into those conversations and not being afraid to bring that to our all hands stage or bring that to our email communication of, okay, this is what we're doing. We're not working from offices. And, you know, we were back on WebEx calls back to back all day long. But really what needed to be happening as well to foster a sense of connection to the business is to lean in and have a conversation about what was actually happening around us in our real lives. Like, parents are dealing with trying to teach kids remote learning and while also working at the same time. And it was a tough time. So internal comms really stepped in to help fill those gaps of not only getting the information of what you need to do your job, but also to create a space that's psychologically safe to have conversations that are extremely tough and usually don't really happen inside of a workplace. And I think that Cisco specifically, from my experience, did this extremely well.
Well, you're really teeing me up here. Our final episode for this season and this series will be about real talk. And that's exactly what you're describing, Amanda. With internal communication, how you're talking to employees and having those honest conversations, even when you don't have an answer at that moment, but you're at least acknowledging that there's a question out there. You're saying, hey, I see the elephant in the room. We know about that elephant, and here's what we're working on to relate to that elephant, for example. It's really important in really so many ways. And it doesn't matter how awkward or tough a topic is, people are still going to want to talk about it. And that's definitely real talk. So kudos to Cisco for having that real talk and acknowledging what your employees actually need communication on. That's the key to success and really restoring our communities as we move forward. When we look ahead, Amanda, what do you think internal communications will be like in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, I have been harping on this point for probably the past 6 months. I think my team, I've been saying, internal comms is not just something, it's no longer an internal post office, right? Like, we're not just sending emails anymore. We are a strategic, measurable function that's having material impact on the business. And even though internal comms is an interesting field because we're expected to be everywhere all at one time, we are expected to listen and learn and provide avenues for feedback and two-way communication while also designing these top-level messaging. I think that leaders, especially after a year like we've just had, have recognized the importance of having someone dedicated to doing those things, someone who is being their eyes and ears of the organization, and someone who's not afraid to come into these leadership meetings when you're talking about ARR and you're talking about bookings and you're talking about revenue. And along with your people in communities or your HR directors, like, right, who's thinking about what your people need and what kind of information they need to do their jobs. And it's not just numbers and revenue anymore. It's about feeling connected and a sense of purpose to the business. So I think that especially in a post-COVID world where we are entering the future of work now, right? We're in a hybrid environment. It's highly unlikely that the entire workforce will go back to the office and things will return to the way they were, right? We're in a totally new world. So I think having those dedicated internal communications people and team that are truly focused on employee communication, change communication, all of these things is going to be more important than ever. I think that has already started. I think that leaders are starting to see the value in what this can bring, especially if it was done, I think, in two ways. If your internal communication was done really well last year, and somehow you've managed to keep your employees really connected to the business on top of all the other things that were going on, then that validates this idea that internal communications is a worthwhile piece of the business. Alternatively, I think anyone who didn't have that and had an absence of internal communication and is trying to unwind some of that chaos and trying to pull people back to the center, they're also realizing that this is a really strategically important role. And I don't think that notion is going anywhere. So my hope for the future is that we have more people, when they're starting their careers, think about internal communication as its own bucket and as its own singular function that they want to be a part of, because it is such an incredibly important job. It's such an incredibly fulfilling job that you get to really put your nose in places maybe where it doesn't always belong. Your job is to listen to the organization, to take those insights and report back to your leadership team so they have deeper audience insights of what their team needs, right? You have to be willing to say, this is what's working and this is what's not working. And I think that there's a lot of new tools coming into the function as well now. Like, there's a lot of sophistication going on in development inside of the internal communications world. So I think that what you're going to see in the post-COVID world is a real modernization and sophistication of what this job is, and also build programs that make people want to be a part of it, as opposed to falling into it like a lot of internal comms practitioners have formerly done.
That's very well said, Amanda. And I think you're right, because I worked in internal communications for a few years. And what I loved about that work was I had all these channels where we could control and ensure that the messages that we crafted and spent so much time and thought on actually got to the employees. And that's very different for those who are in external communications, who have a challenging time with the turbulence of what's happening in our news cycles. And we cannot guarantee that the messages we work so hard on, even the stories that we tell with journalists, will actually make it out into the world. But if you work in internal communications, you do have more of an insurance that that part of the communication process will happen. And you also mentioned change. And I love this idea of change communication. In corporations, you hear change management, and there's those who work to figure out the systems and strategy around navigating an organization through change. But truly, the internal communicators, those who are getting the information to employees, are a big part of that change process. So change communication, we can make that a thing. Amanda.
Let's do that. Let's make that a thing. Yeah. And I think the other important piece of this is in this new world of work, the future of work, this hybrid environment that we're in, we have to really think about how you're building culture when you don't have in-person interaction all the time with everyone at your workforce, right? And some companies were already doing this pre-pandemic. Some companies were forced to do it. So I think that there's proof and evidence that you can build very strong company culture without having in-person events or without having water cooler talk. The question that we as practitioners should ask ourselves is how we're replicating that in a new and modern way, and what tools do we need to facilitate that type of connection building without having high fives or happy hours or whatever, however people, conduct those things. How can you build that culture without that? And some of the things that I'm thinking about now is what's missing in the employee workday. And as comms people, these are little gaps that we should be thinking about building into our strategy. So the feedback that I've gotten from multiple people just in asking around is people miss office desk drive-bys. It's like you're working on something, you have your headphones in, but your office friend comes over to your desk just to say hello. How are you doing? What'd you do last night? Having these like little miniature conversations throughout the day. So how do you replicate that in a distributed environment? The other further point when thinking about that is what's missing, I think, in our work days now and why we're all feeling so burnt to a crisp, is there's an absence of laughter in our days now. So if you think about times when you were going into the office, there's a high likelihood at some point in your day that you were having some conversation with someone. And even if it was for 5 minutes at the coffee bar, you're exchanging some type of conversation and there's some laughter in your day. There's some levity. There's some brightness to your day. And then those things make you go back to your desk and sit down and put your headphones in and focus again. So as communications practitioners and people who are building internal comms messaging that helps your employees feel connected to your workplace, building in opportunities for laughter, for levity, for brief conversations, those things are going to be extremely important to help alleviate some of this pain and pressure and seriousness and heaviness and severity that we all kind of experienced, I think, especially in the later stages of working from home.
I agree with you there. Employees really seem burnt out lately. Have we as practitioners contributed to the burnout?
Yeah, I think, one of the earlier questions is how did internal comms people step in to help? And I think that, we started to communicate so much, right? We were over communicating all the time. And what resulted from that was this overcorrection happened and people were seeing this. We were seeing this email fatigue. We were sending out pertinent information, but then in our feedback channels, we were getting questions about that very subject, right? So we were confused because we were questioning ourselves saying, okay, well, we've been emailing this out and we've been talking about this and putting it in flooding our channels essentially with this message. So why aren't people receiving that message? We're still getting the same questions back in return about this very thing that we've communicated about. And it's because people just couldn't keep up. There was too much information coming out from too many different sources. So we took a serious look at our editorial plan and streamline what kind of messages were coming out. So, what we found is that there was no air traffic control going on in this remote environment, where typically we would have a better handle on it from an in-office perspective, especially knowing if you're walking by, an internal comms desk, hey, I need to send out this email. When can I do that? That was sort of lost, and everyone was just sending things haphazard, chaotic, and it was really contributing to overload. And then as a downside, people were really missing messages. The other thing is, I think people were so ingrained and deeply interested in maintaining a level of connection that we were on video calls all day long, every single day, back to back to back. And what it took away from our teams is it took away meaningful work blocks. So because people were trying so deeply and desperately to stay connected and keep their projects rolling, it was removing them from actually sitting down at their computers and working. Meaningful work became something that we could no longer do. So I think as internal comms people, we really had to take a look at how we can alleviate this. We've gone too far on the other side. Now we need to pull back the reins a little bit. And the other thing that's super important here is guilty as charged here. We were putting out a lot of messaging about self-care. You need to make sure you're taking care of yourself. You need to make sure you're taking care of your family. What we realized is that self-care is not the antidote to burnout. The antidote to burnout is less stress, less expectation to be on your screen all the time. It's building in better work blocks. It's building in more flexibility. What I've told our leaders is, a bubble bath is not going to help someone feel less stressed out at work, right? Telling someone to go do yoga is not going to help them feel like they have tackled this mountain of work. What we have to do is build in more meaningful time for them to tick off projects and work through their to-do lists without the expectation of being on a meeting all the time or being plugged in all the time or being connected all the time. So I think that we're getting smarter about that now in this new environment, but those are sort of three separate, distinct things that we as internal comms people have been working on, and how we contributed, and also how we can sort of alleviate that overcorrection.
Yes, those are great. Those are great ways to be better support for employees during this time where things keep changing, and communicators do have to keep sending out more messaging as updates and rules and protocol have developed and evolved. Do you remember at the beginning, Amanda, there was a new mandate, a new rule, a new boundary, and just different points where we had to keep letting everyone know this is how we're going to operate now. So I can absolutely understand how, while that's necessary, can contribute to stress.
Yep.
And then I also saw from the outside, those who had not worked remotely before, there was a new pressure to be on video calls and on all these instant messaging tools so that they could show that they were working. And I just thought that's so terrible, because people really needed time to think and do the deep work that our jobs require. And also kids were at home, and we were literally teaching them during the workday in the beginning, and we couldn't control for that for such a long time. So I love the tips that you're pointing out. And I do think this is something we need to continue to champion and advocate for. So I'm glad you pointed those things out.
Yeah, I think that, we have to stop over glorifying 60 hours of work. We have to stop putting that pressure on people. That is not the measure of good work. The measure of good work is its meaningful connection to the business, its retention. Like, these are really important measurement factors. It's not sending emails at midnight or 10 p.m. Of course, especially as comms people, we know more than anyone that deadlines are deadlines. And sometimes we're going to work in those sprints. But at the same time, we have to be willing to model the behavior that we expect from other people. And that's important for the leaders as well. We have to stop, especially in this environment and especially moving forward. We are responsible for making sure that we don't breathe too much life into someone who's connected 24/7. It's not a healthy balance, and it's not a sustainable balance. And I think comms people really need to think seriously about that as we build programs moving forward.
Absolutely. Highlighting those who seem to have a better blended life, because I won't say balance, that's really tough for people right now, but more of a natural blend where work and life can coexist well together. That seems like a good representation of a healthy workflow. And you mentioned measurement. I know in external communications, PR, marketing, advertising, social media, measurement factors are very big and a big topic of conversation. How do internal communication professionals measure success?
This is a great question, Melissa. And there is no silver bullet, I don't think, for right now, especially for internal communications people. This is the biggest conundrum of our field, is how do we measure success? And there's a variety of different spectrums in which comms, especially internal communications people, can measure. And there are a lot more sophisticated tools now that are providing such value and insight, particularly Duo. And Cisco works with Banana Tag, which is an email tool. They just recently merged with Staffbase, which Staffbase is a social employee intranet that is an amazing, incredible tool. And they are providing such sophisticated measurement that I think that is wholly the future. But the other half of it is, as much as numbers and sentiment and survey results matter, and your employee NPS score, your eNPS score, matters and correlates with your customer-facing NPS score, I think that those two things are inextricably linked. For me, what I tell my leaders and in my teams usually is, I think qualitative feedback is equally as important as quantitative feedback in internal communications. So this can be done in a variety of ways. One of my favorite things and one of the most necessary things, I think, for internal communication is the audit, the power of the audit. So you have to spend on an annual basis. And if you are building an annual plan, which all internal communications should be doing their best to build a strategy in an internal communications annual plan, that plan must be informed by your people and what they need in that moment. And it's exhausting. That is a very manual effort, but it really, really matters because it gives you an opportunity to meet people from across your business in different functions, in different teams, in different regions. And especially for Duo, back when I was there, they're a growing global workforce. And most of that audience is centered in the United States and has been for several years. Now that workforce is growing globally. So there's so many people in the Asia Pac region. There's a lot of people in London. There's people in Australia. And they don't feel as connected to the business as the people in our Americas field, right? So what's missing in your internal communication strategy? Well, it's the absence of global messaging. We're not always thinking about if this message will land or resonate. We're also not thinking about targeting communications or programs for those people. And it's so important as your business scales to listen to everyone. And that audit becomes a primary way to do that. So that's setting up little functionary meetings with people all across your business and really driving those insights. That qualitative feedback is everything, in my opinion. And I think that it's a best practice that should be adopted. So I think for your top leaders, you have to have a mixture of both. But I think in internal communications people, you would be doing yourself a disservice if you're only looking at email open rates, which is the easiest low-hanging fruit for us. The harder part is actually sitting and listening and garnering the insights from your organization to inform your strategy.
I think that's really intelligent for you to bring up. And your process is very smart as well. I definitely do communication audits before I start a plan as part of my planning process. And listening, like you said, that is so key. It keeps coming up time and time again. People don't feel heard, and they're definitely not feeling, in some instances, listened to. And that's a big part of building that culture that you want at an organization. And then, of course, what they tell you and share with you, and the more they trust you, the deeper you can go with that, can inform and bring to light these ideas that become wonderful engagement programs for your employees, that become fantastic campaigns and communication tools, and even terms that you use that better help you connect. And like you said, Amanda, if you're listening to those outside of the Americas and you're feeling or hearing about that disconnection, then working with them and building that almost target buyer persona like we would do in marketing to say, okay, how would I best reach Kate from Australia and what are her needs given her background and the tools she used? So very intelligent, very smart way to approach that. Well, I do like to ask everyone, because I'm just enthralled with this idea of smart talk. What does smart talk mean to you, Amanda?
I did a great deal of thinking about this when we talked originally about this podcast. And first, I should say that this is an incredible thing that you're doing. I think that this is a subject that people aren't talking about so much. And especially, I thank you so much for the opportunity to come in and talk about my passion and internal communications. Hopefully, other practitioners find this inspiring and want to also dedicate themselves to a field like this. I think it's so important. So for me, Smart Talk is exactly what you just said. It's also about listening. So if you're talking about Smart Talk, have the humility to say, I don't know what I don't know. I just read this great book from my hero in life, Adam Grant. He's an organizational psychologist at Wharton. He's a thought leader. He's incredible. And this question reminded me of a quote that he recently put up on his Twitter page. It says, intelligence isn't a substitute for knowledge. Being smart doesn't mean you've taken the time to be informed. Knowledge isn't a substitute for wisdom. Being informed doesn't mean you've developed good judgment. Good judgment requires the humility to know what you don't know. So when I think about this in terms of Smart Talk, I think about it in a confident humility type of ways. I love internal communications. I'm so passionate about it, but I don't think I know everything about it. And I think as communicators, we are always looking to hone our craft. There's always opportunities for us to improve our writing, our listening, our talking, our consultation for our leaders, our consultation for business. I think there's always areas of opportunity for improvement. And I think it starts with questioning yourself in a way and your work and having the humility to say, I don't know everything. I'm going to look for the answers. This is my hypothesis about something. And based on new information and what I'm taking in, then I will build on that and I will change my beliefs based on new information. And I think that's, to me, what Smart Talk is. It's listening and learning so you can update your beliefs and your hypotheses and you can get smarter and better at your job. And that's happening on a continuous basis.
I love that. Let's continue to update our beliefs and upload new information that helps us make better decisions and have better conversations tomorrow. So perfectly said. Well, Amanda, you've really inspired me today and reminded me how much I enjoy internal communication. For others who are listening who want to connect with you, what's the best way for us to learn more about you or your work?
Sure. I stay really active on LinkedIn and I'm always open for conversations or coffee. You can find me on LinkedIn. My profile name is Amanda-Todd-Austin.
That's really generous of you to share that. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa.
Thanks to our listeners for joining me for today's episode. If you haven't yet, be sure to check out our new PR Pro Gear Shop at prgearshop.com. For years, we couldn't find any cool communicator swag online or even at conferences. So we made some of our own. Check out prgearshop.com for promo gear designed by industry pros for industry pros. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.